Very good. So the topic tonight is the biggest block to your spiritual awakening. Now, spiritual awakening is a very interesting phrase. Spiritual awakening. So let's talk about spiritual awakening for a second, because today we're going to talk about the biggest block to your spiritual awakening. Judith says, awakening, learning more, guidance. Good. These are great. Thank you for participating. What is spiritual awakening? What is spiritual awakening? Have you thought about that? Let's talk about it. T-Lady says, expanding my knowledge of more spiritual teachings and points of view. Nice. Very good. Cool. So spiritual awakening. I personally really don't know the dictionary definition of it, but I will say, because I've been in the business for a while, I would say, this is my point of view, and you can agree or disagree. Spiritual awakening is a moment or a state at which a being is doing work to try to get to, because it believes that when the awakening happens, then something will change, right? Either you will move beyond the ego, you'll be full of peace, you will live in non-duality, you will live in joy, you will live in love, you will live in peace. Once you have your spiritual awakening, you will have new eyes to see, you will have new ears to hear, you'll have new words to say. Something will fundamentally change when you have a spiritual awakening. Do you agree with that? Yes or no? It's kind of, it's not exactly, but it's something like that, right? That there will be a fundamental change when you have your spiritual awakening, right? So since we're talking about this idea about what's your biggest block to spiritual awakening, we have to really understand it. So I think that's a pretty good definition. Something will happen when you have this spiritual awakening. You will not be like you were before. You will be different. Something will change. Okay? So that's good. Now, how do we have a spiritual awakening? How do we have a spiritual awakening? You will be enlightened, right? You'll wake up and you'll be enlightenment. How do we have a spiritual awakening? Or what do you do in order to have a spiritual awakening or to induce a spiritual awakening? There's many things to do. There's many things that you can do. You can read, you can meditate, you can fast, you can learn under a guru, you can do a lot of different things in order to become spiritually woke. And we try a lot of things throughout all of history. It might not be called spiritual awakening, but there's something out there that you don't have that you're trying to get to, right? It might not be spiritual awakening, but something, if you dedicate yourself enough, then it's going to happen, right? Or it might happen or it might not, right? So there's a lot of different things. Hello, Blossom. So there's a lot of different things. Now, this is why I asked you at the beginning why you're here on Insight Timer. All of those answers, remember, there's no wrong or right in our discussions here. There's never wrong or right anyway. So there's all these different things that you do. You might become vegan. You might start meditating. You might start fasting. You might start hanging around with different people. You might start chanting. You might start praying. You might start going to a church. You might start going to a mosque. You might start living very differently than you did in order to usher in some kind of a spiritual awakening, right? So all of those things are things that we tend to do when we're like, oh, I'm on a spiritual path. Nothing's wrong or right, right? Is there anything that anyone can think of that I didn't say? There's a lot of things. Anything that you can think of that I didn't say about what you do. Left online groups of people. Left online groups of people. Is that right? Left, Blossom? Blossom, does that mean left online groups of people? Join with online groups of people? That's one thing. Did I miss anything? And no, leaving Facebook group. So leaving groups of people help you to become spiritually awake. Oh, I think I know what you're going for. I think I know what you're going for. Leaving toxic situations and people. Toxic? Is that what you mean, Blossom? Yes. Okay. So you change your lifestyle. You're like, oh, I can't be around those people anymore. Nothing's wrong with any of this. You're like, oh, I have to change my group of people I'm around. That's the word, toxic, right? Good. So surround yourself with like-minded people, Catherine said, right? Yes. Yes, that's a must, I think. Okay, good. Okay. So all of these things we do in order to usher in or get closer to some kind of a spiritual awakening, right? So we know what a spiritual awakening is. We know what we do. We are a loving community. We leave a community. We chant more. We meditate. We become a vegan. We do all of these different things, right? So the title of today, and I'll say it again, is the biggest block to your spiritual awakening, right? Lorette, you're so sweet. Thank you. Now, listen to great teachers. Go to a guru. Read a book. All those things. So, what if the premise of this whole journey to spiritual awakening, what if the premise has a flaw? What if the premise has a flaw? And what I mean by that is, what if there isn't a spiritual awakening? What if there isn't a spiritual awakening? What if you've been convinced, or you convinced yourself, that you need to do this and this and this to get to that state? What if, I'm just putting that out there, what if you have an underlying belief that there's a problem with what's happening with you now, and that belief, that problem, actually, that belief in that problem, how do I say this? That belief in the problem is the thing, it's one of the things, that's keeping you away from that state that you think is over there. Does that make sense? Anand says the dark night of the soul can be. What if this idea that there's a spiritual awakening is a problem that you believe is a problem, but it's not a problem? Lorette hears me. Ani says chasing it. I said earlier that I'm a teacher and student of A Course in Miracles. The Course in Miracles would say, entering into these things that we're trying to get somewhere is like saying your problem is you think you have a problem, and that's the problem. Take a deep breath. What's the problem? The problem is I'm not woke yet. The problem is I don't have enlightenment yet. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But what if that were true? What if you don't have to wake up? What if you don't have to be spiritually enlightened? What if everything's exactly as it's supposed to be? Lorette says, love the abandoned parts of ourselves? Sure. So what if it's a lie? I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just putting it out there. That somehow we have believed that something is wrong. And that's why we have to get somewhere else. Now, there's nothing at all wrong with going, oh, I want to feel better. There's nothing wrong with that. Meditation makes me feel better. Eating vegan makes me feel better. Whatever happens to be. There's nothing wrong at all or right. Nothing wrong or right about it. But what if the premise itself that you need to get somewhere that you're not? What if that's the flawed premise? I'm just going to let that sit there. You can put whatever you want in the chat. Blossom says acceptance of what is. T-Lady is quoting the course again. The problem is that you think you have a problem with something. That's right. What if there wasn't a problem? Because what we're saying is it's all pointing to there's something wrong. There's something wrong. But there is no wrong and there is no right. It's a very different thing if you're just like, wow, I just really like meditating. Great. There's nothing wrong or right about that. But in this pursuit of spiritual awakening or spiritual enlightenment, it comes with a subtext that something's wrong and it needs to change. That's all I'm saying. I'm okay, you're okay. Remember that book from the 70s? Ego mind always tells us there's something wrong. That's right. Something's wrong. That's right. So the ego mind always tells us something's wrong. So I said, what's the biggest block to your spiritual awakening? So this is pointing to it. This is pointing to it, right? Because if there wasn't a problem, guess what? You'd wake up. There is no spiritual awakening anyway. There really isn't. There is the realization of what's already here. There's the realization of what's already here without your idea that there's a problem. Now, here's a clue. Without your idea that there's a problem. All right? So this separated character, the separated self, the ego that has a character that you're connected to, everything comes back to the character. My character, Max, has a problem, and so or he's doing well, blah, 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 blah. No, he's doing badly, blah, 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 blah. There is this separated self that is always chasing its own tail on some level. It's always trying to get somewhere or accomplish something or make up for something or to control something or to try something. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But here's what I have to say. The biggest problem, the biggest block to your spiritual awakening is your identification with your separated self. Your identification with your separated self is the biggest block. First of all, there isn't a block, but that's it. Because very deep within is this identification with the separated self. The truth is there is no separation. There is only oneness. There is only truth going on. You can't explain this. What this conversation is just throwing out ideas to make you think or not make you think or to invite you to be like, maybe that might be, I never thought about it that way, whatever. So the identification with the separated self is literally the biggest block to spiritual awakening, Because if we weren't identified with the separated self, the separated self that has a problem that you need to fix the problem, then you'd already be here. Everything would already be perfect. And it is already perfect. Take a deep breath. Let's see. Some people are putting things in chat. Hi, Erica says, I love the way you teach. Thank you so much, Erica. It's great to see you. Judith says, so where's the line between examining ourselves, being here now, and the state of the world? Where's the line between examining ourselves and the state of the world? Well, first of all, the state of the world, from what I'm going to posit to you, is that everything of the world is an illusion. You're an illusion. The world is an illusion. And what I mean by an illusion is that it is all perceptual. It's perceptual. You keep perceiving yourself a certain way. Sometimes you perceive yourself like, I really love myself. And another day you wake up and you go, I hate myself. I'm doing really good. No, I'm doing really bad. Oh, I could do better. I could do worse. So you're always perceiving yourself through this lens of the separated self. That's an illusion because it's not the truth of who you really are. Does that make sense? And the world for sure is not real. And it's only perception after perception after perception. I can hold up this LaCroix water right now, and you would have a perception of this. Everyone is going to have a different perception of LaCroix water. Everyone has a different perception of this image that you're seeing on your phone or wherever you're watching me right now. So, Judith, there's no line. It's all an illusion. And that illusion is the block because we believe that that's real. Take a deep breath. Does that make sense, Judith? Lorette says, yes, it is the disconnection from ourselves, others, and the Supreme Being. I think I get what you're saying. The separated self is the part, good, Judith, that's always trying to fix, to chase, to be more peaceful, to be more spiritual. There's nothing wrong with any of this. I have to say this over and over when I teach, because there isn't anything wrong. We're just stating how it is. This is just meant to open you up and say, that's interesting. You could either go, well, that's bullshit, or I think I'm understanding that. And you don't have to understand it, because what I'm pointing to here is far beyond understanding. You know why? Because it's only the separated self that tries to understand. The truth is, you're already here. It's already happening. And there is no problem. Unless yourself decides that there's a problem that has to be overcome. Right? Erica says, I get what you mean by illusion, but that also bothers me because I feel like I make up my own suffering. Of course you do. Of course you do, Erica. I'm sorry to say, but you do. Have you ever heard of the term, I am my own worst enemy? That is one of the truest things that could ever be. We are our own worst enemy because we're trying to try to fix what can't be fixed. Of course, that's going to bother you because the self, the separated self, wants to go, I get it. I know exactly what's going on. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But of course, it's going to bother you because we do create our own suffering. I'm suggesting here that there's another way of living. Erica's like, damn it. There's another way of living where you're not creating your own suffering. But suffering can happen, but it doesn't happen to a character. It just appears to be happening. Tanisha says, do we suffer more when we start to find more peace? Not necessarily, but it could happen. Now, let me say this. This is something that you've all heard before. I forget the exact phrase, but Pain happens. What is that? Something, I'm going to say it wrong, but pain will happen. Suffering is an option. So suffering has to have a being involved in the suffering, right? So suffering is something that a separated self goes through. It suffers. There's nothing wrong with suffering at all. Actually, sometimes suffering is one of the things that makes you kind of get and feel what we're talking about here. Ego mind can never get it. That's right. Awesome. So Tanisha, it's not really, you don't suffer more when you start to find peace. But I will say, the more that you start to see and start to have the real lived experience that there is a separate self going on, for lack of a better term, shit's going to come up. It's going to come up. And when it comes up, then you have the opportunity to start to let go of that character, to let go of that story, to let go of that illusion, and then go, oh, no wonder my life has been like this, because I've identified with this for so long that I just thought that's the way it was. Oh, of course there's a problem. Of course that's what's going to happen. Of course, because you've identified so closely. You're so close into the egoic separated self that you can't even see it. And then that's when the journey really starts. It's not pretending you're okay and everything's fantastic, because that's just another way that the separated self goes, I'm spiritual now. Understand? I'm not saying you have to suffer, but probably not truthful. Thank you for your donation, Blossom. I appreciate it. Tanisha says, okay, I think I'm starting to get it. Well, I'm a mess. Good. That is so good. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You are a mess. Of course you're a mess. I'm a mess. Everyone's a fucking mess. Because if you're in your separated self, if you're identifying, remember what I said, the biggest block to your spiritual awakening is the identification with the separated self. If you're identified with the separated self, you're a mess. Even if everything's going good, you're a mess. Thank you. Had an aha moment when you mentioned about suffering. Good, Blossom. Very good. Okay. Anyone else want to ask anything? We're going to start wrapping up now. Anyone want to say anything? Thank you so much for your interaction today. That really helps me to help you.